The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer. Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong. But he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. On the other hand, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Lapino was no game changer, but could Renato really leave an old friend to the Ravens? Ah, Lapino. Apparently, the Mad Rabbit had sold a Pegasus that he did not exactly own. Lapino always wiggled out of trouble, given time. But he was out of time. The Ravens had figured out that Lapino was a rebel spy. If the fleet reached him first, they'd string him up for that. Never mind the winged horse. Lapino had apparently managed to confuse the judge by arguing that he hadn't actually stolen a winged horse. He'd only sold it. But wait, where was the prison? The village was empty. Had everybody fled the Ravens? Now he could slice the wings off a fly in the air. Not that he would. It's sort of mean, really. That was odd. Renato had been here,
At this exact place, at this exact time. But this time, there were so many more ravens.
Ravens were landing everywhere. The advance guard. He'd better get moving. If they got to Lupino first, they'd eat him for breakfast. Or a snack. Ravens weren't picky. If they got hungry, they sometimes forgot to interrogate their prisoners. Even top spies like Lupino. Where had the mad rabbit got to? He knew the known knowns, and even some of the known unknowns. But he didn't know the unknown unknowns. You dig? Renato felt uncomfortable around cemeteries. They reminded him of a goth vixen he'd dated for a while. The new pathway made Renato curious. Dirty and bloody, Renato finally reached Lupino. The rabbit was practicing his shuffle. Renato recognized the cards. It was Lupino's favorite deck. Oh, I thought you were in danger. I am. The ravens are coming. Oh, the prison thing. Right, yeah, we see this guard owed me 53 ducats, so we made a deal. They're very reasonable people, actually, for weasels. Now, I got a brilliant plan to kidnap Zenobia.
We capture Zenobia, we find out what she knows, and that's the whole war right there. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy.
Capture the Emperor's greatest general, who happened to also be a deadly sorcerer, and, oh, His only daughter? Ah, that would be worth it. And it would be nice to see her. He'd always had a soft spot for her. And he felt sure she had one for him.
On the other hand, he could still get to the core of the Sky Ripper, even if he couldn't get the whole thing. It must have great power. To make the Sky Ripper, the Transcendent Emperor had wrapped an armature around the eye of a god. Bernardo had already let that armature slip away to save Lupino's life. But even its core, the eye torn from a god, surely they could fashion a great weapon from that.
The core of the Sky Ripper? Lupino's excited. That's an actual thing that we could just go and get. You've been busy.
He sure had. Bernardo told him all the things he'd been up to. Soon they got to talking about old times, about wages they'd won and lost, and scrapes they'd barely got out of. It was good to be back with his friend. True, the core was capable of terrible, uncontrollable destruction. But this time, he was sure it would work great. It's beautiful here, thought Bernardo. He was thrilled to be back with his old war buddy. He'd missed the mad rabbit, but something was not quite right.
Long live the Emperor! Called the ravens.
Over here, right. There was something sour in the air. Like the earth had ruptured over something that had been fermenting for a very long time.
Ha! Bet you never saw that coming.
Oh, now you smell even worse.
Renato felt wrong all over. He could feel an almost palpable sickness in the air. And if the land could have tumors, they would look like these monstrous crystals. The forest was quieter than it had been. There were insects, but few birds, if you didn't count the ravens. Renato smelled sick animals and dying ones, but no healthy ones. And getting a bad feeling about this, Renato thought. Maybe Lapina was right. Maybe they should have kidnapped Zenobia instead of coming here.
Where did that go to?
Of course there was a puzzle. You couldn't expect the Transcendent Emperor to bury a god's eye in a leather sack where anyone could pick it up.
This couldn't be good for global warming.
Renato felt ready to become faster, stronger, bolder. If only he could figure out which.
As he held the radiant icosahedron, Renato felt queasy, like dozens of tiny worms were nibbling his insides.
It wasn't healthy to be so close to the eye of a god. How could he use it? He could take it to the observatory. The scientists there could tell him how to harness its ancient power. But honestly, Renato ached to get away from it.
He brought the core back with him to the Farfarer. But honestly, Renato ached to be rid of it.
Tell you what, said Lupino. I'll take it to the observatory. You attack the Imperial outpost.
The Imperial outpost was a vital communications node. Taking it could shatter the Empire's ability to coordinate. And it would be full of secret plans and maps and maybe even rebel prisoners. It was a good target for a hero like Renato.
But what if Lupino lost the core to the Empire? That could be a good thing, couldn't it? Was Renato ready to take that risk? Maybe it was better if he brought the core to the scientists himself.
Trust me, Renato, you won't regret this. I'll treat the core like it was my own baby daughter.
As the Farfarer dived towards the Nexus, Lupino was jumping up and down with excitement. "Stop rabbiting around," Renato said. Lupino just stared at him. The moment the ship landed, Lupino leapt off the ship.
As Lupino vanished into the wilds of the Nexus, Renato vaguely remembered Lupino had a baby daughter, didn't he? And he told her mother he was going out to get some Easter eggs, and he'd never come back. But Renato was relieved not to carry the core anymore. He was already feeling better. And who knows, maybe this time Lupino would get it right. And if Renato could take the outpost, he'd have access to all the Empire's communications in this sector, right?
What kind of raven can't fly? Thought Renato.
The platform used a hybrid propulsion system fueled by anti-gravity and wishful thinking.
Renato caught his breath. His joints still hurt, but he couldn't feel the poison in his system anymore. He'd let the armature slip out of his hands to save his friend Lapino. Of course he had to let Lapino take the core. The rebellion needed every man doing his duty. And the rabbit would be no good taking on an Imperial outpost, right?
The rebellion had once tried to take the Imperial outpost. The rebel ships were shot down before they could even see it. But maybe a single fox could sneak through their defenses.
Renato took the outpost with a song in his heart. Soon, he was stuffing his sack with key messages from and to the fleet. Then the far speaker toad chortled a new message. The observatory had been sacked by ravens. Lapino and all the scientists had been taken to the mountains. Why? Why had he trusted Lapino again? And now the Empire had the core. Renato hailed the rebel base to warn them. But their far speaker didn't croak back. Was the base under attack too? Who knew what was going on at the base? But he knew what the ravens would do to Lapino if Renato didn't rescue him fast. What are all friends for, if not to need rescuing every few days? Renato felt a twinge of doubt. Should he have gone to the base? No. Logically, wherever they'd taken Lapino was probably where they took the core, right? Oh, why couldn't Lapino have just, for once, not got himself captured? Was that too much to ask? He shouldn't be too hard on the rabbit. No, he meant well, and he was insanely brave. You have to admire that.
There was an inscription, no spitting.
Where were they holding Lapino anyway? There was no sign of him or the ravens who'd captured him. Just rocks and snow and the usual scouts. No sign of the core either. Was this a wild rabbit chase? Oh, trust Lapino to screw up even getting captured. But what was this rebellion for anyway? Lapino was a useless goof. But he was a friend. If friends didn't matter anymore, what was the point of winning this war?
Ravens didn't smell any better dead, and I'd have thought. For a moment, Renata wished that somebody had been watching. The rebellion would soon be engaging the Imperial fleet in a desperate battle. All Reynardo had done was save a friend. It didn't feel as good as he'd hoped.
At the end of the mountain path, Reynardo came to a clearing. There was a campfire, raven feathers, and... oh, Lapino's lucky deck of cards. Well, that wasn't good. Reynardo hoped Lapino would not try to cheat his captors at cards. Ravens were much better than weasels at counting, and they had a very poor sense of humor.
Then, he saw what he had hoped never to see. Fresh scraps of rabbit fur. Ragged and bloody, ravens would eat anything.
By Grabthar's hammer! Reynardo screamed at the sky. I will avenge you!
The rebels had assembled their fleet. Ahead, the clouds were dark with Imperial ships. If he could reach the Emperor before the rest of the rebels did, maybe he could settle this without too much bloodshed. He set sail, and the Farfarer shot forward.
Poor Lapino had never been a great warrior. The mad rabbit was good for a lark and a laugh. and a pint. The thought of ravens eating him made Reynardo furious. The way they were eating up the land. The way the Emperor was eating up the people with his new, bloodthirsty ways. He would make them all pay.
portal that led right into the middle of the fleet. It was a glaring weakness in the defense. There was an inscription. Praise the sun.
Hey, is that a word for a lot of ravens? Like a doofus of ravens?
Danced around the room yelling,
Oh yeah, that's how we do it.
it was something he liked to do, but only after he'd killed all the witnesses.
He had given up every objective to save his friend. He had given up the armature, the core, the gem, and even Zenobia. He loved Lupino, he realized. And now the rabbit was gone. A hero looks out for his friends, even when they're gone. He would send Lupino an honor guard of ravens to serve him in the halls of the Valiant. He would avenge him.
Statue.
Building these platforms was so expensive, they'd run out of budget for guardrails.
Finally, he reached the Emperor's ship. And there was Lupino, surrounded by ravens. He was alive! They'd eaten some other rabbit. "I'll save you!" he shouted with joy and flung himself at the ravens. "Aw, you shouldn't have," said Lupino when the last raven was down. Renato threw his arms around his best friend. "I had to come. I love you, man. You really, really shouldn't have," said Lupino. And Renato felt a rather sharp pain in his back. As he collapsed, Lupino took the dagger out of Renato's back and wiped it off on Renato's sleeve. "Why, you always have to be the hero. Brave Renato, epic Renato, super sexy Renato, and I'm sick of it. But I loved you." "And you thought I was the idiot," said Lupino as Renato died. He should go back to some of the choices he'd faced before. Maybe there were new paths that had opened up, like those doors he was opening up all over the map that took him to new treasures and around his enemies. But he'd learned another true thing. Lupino was a traitor. Renato had suspected there was something wrong with the Mad Rabbit, but now he knew there was malice behind his goofiness. The book's pages fluttered to the beginning once again. Faster than before?
and he fell.
The clouds parted over the Isles of Boreas. It was time to choose. The rebellion was in trouble. Ravens were scouting for the secret rebel base. They needed a game changer.
Pieces of the Sky Ripper had surfaced. Renato knew that using it could go catastrophically wrong, but he was sure he could figure out how to use it safely. Also, a temple had risen out of empty desert. The Iblis stone was hidden there. It was a dangerous artifact. It could corrupt its user into a bloodthirsty monster. Maybe he could find a way to use it, to take its power without surrendering to its wickedness. And also, his old friend Lapino needed rescuing. Of course, Renato had a pretty strong suspicion that Lapino had betrayed the rebellion, and he had a gut feeling that he needed to use that to his advantage.
Renato finally realized that Lapino was a traitor to the cause.
And maybe Renato could use that somehow.
Renato couldn't quite put his paw on when he'd realized Lapino was working for the Empire. He'd never exactly seen Lapino sending coded messages to the palace, but he was sure. The rabbit had been on too many disastrous missions where he was the only survivor, or where he accidentally missed getting on the boat that went down to the abyss in flames. If Renato could prevent Lapino from getting back to the fleet with all the intelligence he'd probably gathered, it might be worth the trip. How had they come to this? They'd been on so many adventures together. Lapino had talked Renato out of prison at least 4 times, and Renato had rescued Lapino from at least 2 lynch mobs. He'd always felt that the rabbit resented him. Lapino was hilarious because he was so down on himself and everyone else. But behind the laughs, he wasn't a happy camper. Ooh, was this payback? Or did the Empire have his little white tail in a vice?
So that's what they meant by a firewall. What unlocks a firewall?
Ravens were landing everywhere from dropships. He'd better get moving. If they got to Lapino first, the Rabbit would give the Empire all the intelligence he'd been stealing from the Rebellion, and they'd probably give him a medal. He'd have to be very careful about how he played Lapino. At the slightest hint of danger, the Mad Rabbit would take off like a rabbit.
There was still no sign of Lapino. Not a hair, not a pellet. Was he hiding in the cemetery further down the road? That didn't seem like him. Lapino would betray him. The core was dangerous. Now, Renato had a fleeting idea that the two ideas went together somehow. And then it was gone again. Ah, damn ideas. They never stuck around when you needed them.
Bloody and exhausted, Renato finally reached Lapino. The Rabbit was practicing shuffling his favorite deck. Now that he knew what the Rabbit was, there were a few things about him that Renato didn't find so amusing anymore. You sent me an urgent message saying that you're in danger. Oh, I am. The Ravens are coming. Now, I got a clever plan to kidnap Zenobia. Renato wanted to clap shackles on the Rabbit and shout, "You're a traitor, and I'm not falling for it." But if there was one thing Renato was sure of, it was that the core of the Sky Ripper was dangerous mostly to its user. If he could put it in the Emperor's hands, old Isengrim III might blow himself and his fleet up with it. Yes, that was it. Renato felt like a real hero, brave and smart. He told the Rabbit all about the Sky Ripper's God's Eye core. "I'll go get the core while you attack Zenobia," he told the Rabbit. "Wait, I've an even better idea. I'll get the core and you attack Zenobia," said the Rabbit. "Right, yeah, that is better," agreed Renato. Perfect. The traitor would make sure the Emperor got the core. Now Renato just needed the Emperor to use the core. If he could only get something that the Emperor wanted very badly. Zenobia. He could save her and bait the Emperor at the same time. Right. Now, all Renato had to do was fight his way through Zenobia's invading troops, sneak onto her ship and into her bedroom, and kidnap her without any of her dozens of guards alerting her.
Then, he would rely on her love for him to convince her how evil her father was, so she'd run away with him instead of going back to her father, who was going to blow himself up.
It did sound a little risky. But Renato had a feeling it would work out somehow. It always did.